The ERC has campaigned for more than 10 years against the wrongful removal of Romani children from their biological families. To date, the ERC, we've conducted research and published reports and legal action briefs in 10 countries, including EU member states and accession countries. And we've provided legal support to families, and in some cases, we've taken legal action against the authorities. I'll talk about that later. Now, our research is not kind of la per la research. It's to provide data and information, to allow for more legal interventions to prevent unnecessary removals, to stimulate public debate, and today is a perfect opportunity, to push for substantive reforms in order to root out both deliberate and unwitting discriminatory practices, to advocate for increased social support for families in difficulty, and to ensure that children are not removed from their families primarily because of poverty and prejudice. Now, our first report came out at the beginning of the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies up to 2020. And our report was called Life Sentence, and it revealed that Romani children were overrepresented in institutional care in Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Italy, Romania, and Slovakia. We found that preventative measures were found to be inadequate. There were insufficient skilled social workers and no community-level support services in isolated Romani neighbourhoods due to insufficient funding. The research found that Romani children experienced physical abuse, ill treatment, and ethnic discrimination in and out of the homes. The vast majority of Romani children in institutional care had little prospect of being returned to their biological families, and many spent their whole childhood in an institutional setting. Now, factors contributing to the overrepresentation of children in institutional care include discrimination, poverty, and material conditions, school absenteeism, single parenthood, and unwanted pregnancies and migration. Despite legislation prohibiting the removal of children from their families on the grounds of poverty or lack of means, the research found that, according to Romani parents and child protection workers in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania, poverty among Romani families was the most common reason for child removal. As one Romani family from Hungary told researchers, their newborn child was removed and placed with foster parents because their house was in bad condition since the storm in the summer damaged the roof. One of the rooms got damp, and the Child Welfare Services told us that it was no place to receive a newborn baby. The family received no financial help, no social support to remedy that situation. Now, some child interviewees confirmed that poverty was the cause of their removal. We were taken from our family because there was little food and no proper clothing. Interviews with childcare professionals revealed a wide range of attitudes, from the well-informed and socially aware to prejudiced social workers who blamed Roma subculture or the thinking, attitudes and customs of Roma for the endangerment of Romani children and their placement in institutional care. In all countries covered by the 2011 study, researchers documented the inadequacy of preventative measures by child protection authorities in relation to the needs of the families at risk of separation. Several child protection workers observed that it's very easy to enter institutional care, but almost impossible to leave it. In essence, the research found that once forcibly inducted into the state care system, Romani children were sucked into a cycle from which there was little prospect of escape until they came of age. Now, this cycle of so-called care rendered them extremely vulnerable and woefully unprepared for life beyond the institution. Now, the evidence from our latest 2025 country review suggests that despite the declared lack of ethnically disaggregated data, it remains the case that hugely disproportionate numbers of children end up in state care institutions. In Slovakia, the UNCRC expressed concerns that the majority of children in institutional care were of Romani origin, but very few were adopted, and alternative and foster care options were limited. Now, despite this lack of ethnically disaggregated data, our estimates from the research allowing for regional variations within country, in Slovakia, where Roma account for 6 to 8% of the total population, an estimated 63% of children in state care were of Romani origin. Similarly, in Romania, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, we find this huge disproportion between the percentage of Roma and the number of children, the estimates of children in state care. Now, based on interviews carried out by ERC researchers, while reasons for removing children from their families included discrete incidents such as school truancy or a tragedy such as the death of a parent. The most common causes persistently are related to extreme poverty, lack of income, and precarious living conditions in segregated settlements. This deep poverty among Roma is not some incidental vagary of the free market, but rather, as Professor Philip Alston, UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, made clear in the case of Romania, it is a function of a long history of discrimination, neglect, and isolation. Very many at-risk Romani families do not have access to social supports, and preventative measures remain scarce. And they're often non-existent in the most deprived regions where the need is greatest. As a consequence, underfunding combined with institutional discrimination still results 10 years after of Romani children being removed from their families being a first rather than final option for the authorities. In the case of the Czech Republic, the European Committee of Social Rights in its 2020 ruling described as unacceptable that the government allows placement of children in what it calls harmful institutions as de facto a measure of first resort, without obliging the public authorities to first attempt to provide support to the child's birth family or find placement in substitute family. Despite the much lauded and marked progress on deinstitutionalization over the last 10 years, this process has stalled in the countries reviewed, with expert groups and civil society organizations warning of operational dysfunction, diminishing political will, and inadequate funding. In Bulgaria, problems included quality issues about the types of alternative care placements, the lack of meaningful coordination or consultation with partners, compounded by transparency deficits in decision-making related to child protection policy. There's an absence of detailed planning and monitoring mechanisms at national level and severe under-resourcing of child protection systems. This under-resourcing results in acute staff shortages, poor material resources, and a high turnover of social workers who lack competency-based standards, training, and supervision. Similarly, in Romania, the process of deinstitutionalization slowed down significantly for two reasons. First, declining living conditions, severe poverty, and emigration meant that more children were either placed by parents in institutions or removed from their families. Second, public sector hiring freezes and budget cuts further limited the system's already stretched capacity to deliver on badly needed family-type care services. Across the country surveyed, as many as 1/3 of the children in state care had spent 90% of their entire lives inside the system. For children separated at an early age, prospects for family reintegration are severely reduced by the lack of support or counselling for Romani parents, especially if the household is located in a remote or marginalised settlement. After 6 years of separation, the chances of kids exiting the system diminish even further, with the likelihood of being reintegrated into their own family reduced to virtually zero. 10 years on from the first round of ERC research, this latest 2020 research confirms that it still remains the case. While it's very easy to be sucked into the system, it's virtually impossible for children to escape it until they come of age. The institution is the only family they know, and the institution is deeply damaging. UN Special Rapporteur Daniel Spouras detailed how young children experience institutionalization and emphasized that children with disabilities and children from ethnic minorities suffer most. He said social and interpersonal development is impaired, physical growth is slowed, and cognitive and language development is delayed. It should be stressed that even if it were possible to provide conditions in institutions that are not inhumane or degrading, or to eliminate violence and abuse, it is almost impossible for children in institutions to form consistent attachment to a carer, and this will lead to detrimental effects on their development. Based on its research, its advocacy, its litigation, the ERC maintains that the best interests of the child must prevail at all times, and that family-based care should come before any alternative care arrangements, while fully accepting that there are cases where alternatives to parental care must be provided. Now, as the European Union pushes forward with its EU Strategic Framework for Equality, Inclusion and Participation for 2020-2030, across Member States and the enlargement region, we repeat our call for a more complex, child-centred approach that pays close attention to the rights and the needs of the most vulnerable, and that revised national strategies become fully inclusive so that no child is left behind.